All right, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for our February edition of our Evidence-Based Practice Network. We're happy to welcome back to the show Graham Thomas, principal of North Elementary School in Lancaster, South Carolina, and he's going to talk with us today about effective scheduling for students with disabilities. I am not seeing the PowerPoint up yet on my side, so we'll give it a second to get that posted before
Uh,
he gets started.
Graham, you can share it from your computer.
Oh, good.
Okie dokie, I see it now. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Um, yeah, my name is Graham Thomas. I'm currently the principal at North Elementary in Lancaster County. Just to give you a quick background, this is what am I in, year one and a half? So this is my second year as the principal at North. And before that, I did 3 years as an assistant principal in an elementary school in Lancaster. And then 3 years as an assistant principal at a middle school in Rock Hill, which was a lot of fun. And then I was a special ed resource teacher for 10 years in Rock Hill at a middle school as well. Well, two different middle schools. So just some background there, and why you would even want to listen. I just wanted to talk to you about the effective scheduling and some things that I saw from the middle school level, and then what we're currently doing. And this was actually really our first year of doing it here for our scheduling. So we'll just look at it from those two lenses. So, why it matters, obviously, if you have students with disabilities in your school, which is everyone, you understand the legal responsibility of the minutes and then the instructional responsibility of you got kids that need time and you have to get them that time and you have to figure out how does that work in our day? Where do we get those things in? Obviously, you're talking about what's appropriate. So when we talk about FAPE, right? And the least restrictive, which is a big topic of conversation. I will talk a little bit about co-teaching because I did do a lot of that as a teacher. Um, and I think it can be good if done well. But it's one of those things that has to work in your schedule as well. I haven't found a way to really make it work in elementary school yet. So if you have questions about co-teaching in elementary school, I don't know that I'll be your guy for that. And then you're building around the student needs. So those are kind of the things that we looked at when we started to do this. And we did this last summer, so I'm so fresh on this process. But we started early, and I tried to convince my two resource special ed teachers that were here. I said, "Hey, we're gonna recreate the master schedule. I'd love for you guys to be a part of it and help me create it, and you have a say in all of it." And they said, "Listen, we're not scheduling people, and we enjoy our summer, so no thanks." And they just said, "Here are our groups. We're good with whatever." I was like, "All right." So that made it easy for us. So we started and we started with them. Made sure again that we had our support from the district level of what we wanted to do, and then started to build it out from there. But it definitely is a team approach because I'll tell you that I got some of these ideas from another principal in this district who already kind of had a schedule that was similar to this, and so we started with that, and then had to shift it to make it work for us, and again with the kids that we have. So that's always a big part. Um, you want to make sure that you're looking at the students that you have and make sure that you're placing them based on some kind of data source and that you're looking at those kids that need the highest minutes first. I think that makes it a little easier. So if you've got a kid that needs 50 minutes of resource and you've got one that needs 30, like you start with that higher one because you know you're going to have to block off that amount of time. And then I said avoid clustering here sometimes, and I'll put my hand up. When I was in middle school and I was doing co-teaching, I wanted to cram as many of the resource kids or the kids that I was seeing in inclusion into one class because I could be in there more with more frequency. But that tends to not work out the way that you think it's going to. So having them, evenly spread out is a lot better for the kids in there to have that, heterogeneous kind of mix of the kids in there instead of saying, hey, we're going to have a whole leveled class that's over this direction, tends to not work out as well as you think that it would. So just make sure that you try to avoid clustering them in that way. Um, Again, when we were looking at these kids for our resource teachers specifically, we do have some that are cross grade level, right? Like we have some kids who are fifth graders who could, and this is the lowest that it kind of goes, who could be in a group with a third grader, right? Based on their ability and based on how they did on our progress monitoring, right? And the data that we have. I don't like to necessarily, and I get it. Like sometimes if they're, you can't have somebody that's too far apart age-wise because the kids don't really like that. But we were able to make it work where we're really close. It might be fourth and fifth grade or third and fourth grade that are kind of together. And I'll show you kind of an example here in a minute of what that looks like of how we did it. But you're going to group them by skill and not necessarily, again, by their grade or age. And then another thing that I'll show you here in a minute is that we do have two what we call multi-categorical classes, and they would be like your mild disabilities classes, whatever you call them. I think in Rock Hill they called them like what they called them. They had weird names for it, like building bridges and unique pathways and stuff like that. But it's your level one, your mild disability classes. So we utilize those teachers too. The one of our teachers has only, I say only, and if I have any self-contained teachers or no, only 7 kids or 8 kids. I'm not saying that. It can be very difficult, but she's got 7 or 8, so she has a little room for some other kids. So if we have some kids who are a little bit lower and she has the space to bring them in there for a rotation on that level, then we can work them into that classroom for that time period of what they need. So if you're flexible and you're thinking about that, you can, and you're, especially if your resource teachers are overloaded, you can use those other teachers to help to be service providers instead of saying they're the case manager, but they could maybe work them in for a writing group or a reading group or a math group in there too. And then, yeah, just know that you're going to have kids that receive multiple services and like, what does that look like? Where are you taking it from? Um, Again, I'll talk about this too. We have, how about this? Our district teacher of the year is actually in for Lancaster is my one of my self-contained teachers. She's amazing. And she has 2 assistants in her classroom, and are they're very well planned and structured and thought out. So if we do have to end up using her or put people in there, like she's got them rolling and working, and they can jump in a group if we get the timing right. And I'll talk about that too when we're talking about pushing kids out in the other direction. She is really flexible with her schedule. In taking kids that aren't necessarily in her class, and then also what it looks like when she's trying to push kids out to other teachers when they're ready for that kind of thing. So just make sure that you're looking at who has the expertise with those kids. Because I know a lot of times, if you've got a kid who maybe has some tough behaviors, you have a teacher that is a little bit better with them. So maybe in your school there, you have one teacher that's only working with the K1, 2, and you've got one, 3, or 4, 5, or whatever. You got them grade level. When you know this teacher works better with this kid, then leave them with that teacher and plan that way. And that's something that we've done with a couple of kids this year too. So these are the services that we have. We're here. We're just looking at the resource pullout model. And then we do have kids who are on consult, and then again we actually have 4 self-contained classes that are here because we have 2 moderate disability classes and one that I would even consider to be more in the severe range now. But we do have all of those services. We don't have any co-teaching going on at the moment when it comes to our resource kids, but it's something I'm thinking about. But I do like how we have it right now. I took a little snapshot of our schedule, and you can kind of see here where they have that off grade level time is what we call it. And now I do have on there that it says ML, and that's our multilingual learners. So the idea was at the beginning of the year that the kids would be pulled out if they needed intervention from our interventionists, if they needed multilingual, and if they were going to be resourced, then they could pull them from this block of time, right? Now, I'm splitting an ML teacher, and you know how that is. She has to make her own schedule. Speech is kind of the same way, so I wasn't able to work that out. But we were able to take what groups we had. We started with the special ed kids, and then we looked at the times, made sure our special ed teachers had planning time and their unencumbered time as well, and then marked out their schedule. So if you see those times that say off grade level times, that's when one of the resource groups would be. And then our interventionists can also pull kids during that time to make sure that they're not missing the core content, instructional piece when they're in there with the classroom teacher. And then what we're left with, and what we've been pushing our classroom teachers to do, is that you should be left with a group of kids in there that's a little bit smaller that you can really get some stuff done with, and you're not necessarily looking at that wouldn't be a tier one time, right? So and I'll tell you that the overall feedback after the first part of the year is that the teachers love this because they know exactly when, exactly what to expect. Intervention and getting pulled out at all different times, and that was really the big part because sometimes it can be at different times for that piece, but they really do love it. And if you look, you can see like third and fourth grade kind of overlap on that time, and one of them's math and one of them's ELA. So those are two different things. And down, if I could go further down, I just screenshotted this. There's some other pieces where we've matched up times where it's two different ELA blocks and we're pulling them during that time. But the goal is if they need math resource, they're going during their math time. If they need ELA, they're going during ELA. And our numbers were really good this year for resource, so we were able to work this out. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep it the same moving forward. But also, this is when our two self-contained multi-cat teachers, they look at this as well, and they know when they can send their kids, if they're ready, to go and be a part of a general ed class for a little bit. Let's say, I know we have several second graders right now, actually, that are going to a ELA block first thing in the morning, right? With an ELA class. They're pushing out for that. And then they go from that and they go to specials with them. And then they come back and they do their stuff in their self-contained classroom. But that's kind of she has created, both of those teachers have created their schedules so that they can work into our master schedule as well, which really works for us because again, if we need them to help us offload some like higher numbers and resource, they're able to help us with that piece as well. Um, Again, just like I told you, we have a dedicated blocked off time, and then we're protecting that tier one time, that tier one instruction, to make sure that, I think that's a thing that everybody, how are we gonna, how do we make sure that they get this time in the classroom? Well, this makes sure that the teachers know exactly when they're supposed to be teaching these things. I told you about our multi-cat and how they're flexible with us. I will tell you that we have some of the best assistants in the world, and that's what makes this work. So in our like I have three assistants, two in one class and one in another, and they are a big part of the instructional rotations in the classroom. And so a kid, like they're really, really good at working with the kids. And so they're a huge part in making sure that nobody's getting missed or that you know, we're not having this downtime because the biggest part is making sure that the kids get enough opportunity to respond to an adult with some feedback. And so making sure that they are with somebody where they're practicing with them and they can give them that immediate feedback is really, really good. And we have great assistants. They take instruction well, they take criticism well, they take anything we ask them to do, and we're very fortunate at that. So I feel very lucky on those things. Um, I think I had in here also a sample middle school schedule, so I'll kind of break this down for you. This is something I think this was like the last schedule that I ran when I was a teacher. But if you look here, I think all middle schools have some kind of what they called it enrichment. What do we call it? Like academy or something like that, or people call it like whatever your mascot is, nighttime or whatever. But that piece, sometimes they used it for special ed, sometimes they didn't. And then those, you can see that I would have inclusion classes. and I would rotate between two teachers. And the only way to make that work is that I had to have common planning time with them, and we really had to be intentional with what we were doing, right? Like I couldn't come in there and sit in the background and make sure that Jimmy was on task, or that, once she got done teaching the lesson, then I'd go help whoever, was in there. They would use me again as a whole nother person, and so that we were hitting as many people as possible. The thing that I think is different is that we had these intensive classes for students who you would not put in a self-contained multi-cat class, because they have a learning disability, but they were very low academically. So what we did was, instead of them going to that self-contained class, they would come to me and I would teach them, and these were eighth graders, pre-algebra, but we talk about the essentials, but the real essentials, and I would just try to get them as close as I could. And if I could push them back to a class, then I would. If not, then, in eighth grade, you might be talking about occupational credential or somewhere in that range. But it was really for those kids that we were missing a spot for. They couldn't really handle it with just a co-taught kind of model in the classroom. They needed a little bit slower, a little more support in a smaller setting. Kind of looked like a resource classroom, but I was like their teacher of record. And so we called those intensive classes that were really good. And the goal was to try to push them back out to a regular class after that. And then we had a teacher who was running like an academic, I hate calling it an academic support kind of class, but that typical middle school model of where you go to a special ed teacher for your elective period, right? Which I didn't always like, because then that means that took them out of an elective. But some kids did need that, as long as we're not using it as like a homework time or a makeup work time, or we're going to go to Mr. Thomas so he can give us his test. It needs to be structured, and you need to either be preloading them with something, or we're working on some skill, that again helps them access the general curriculum. So that's just an example of what one of those schedules might look like. And again, personnel matters. We were lucky at the school I was at. We had four resource teachers. So one per grade level, and then one person to run that like kind of academic support model position right there. So that all worked out for us. And so just the takeaways, the whole school has to be involved. And I'll give you an example of something that is kind of related to this, but like I'm really into the walk to read model, and I think that it can be very beneficial. And one of my grade levels was doing that, and we just needed more people. And like if I decide to do this, I would need my whole school involved so that we can really zero out a time to make that work. Right? To do it in a microcosm of that one grade level just wasn't working very well, because we needed more people. So think about that when you're planning this out. If you're somebody that gets to help with the schedule, you got to start with that, because it's got to be everybody involved. Use your staff in a way that's like, these aren't your kids, these are your kids, these are our kids. Um, I may not be the case manager, but I might provide the writing time for this kid, or I might provide the math time, and somebody else is providing this, because, again, we have to make it work in our schedule that we have. Make sure that the student need is driving that you don't just say we have a cookie cutter mold and that's what we're going to stick them in. I know, again, especially in secondary, that's, you know, guilty. That happens a lot just based on the master schedule of what's going on there. And then I'll say the biggest part is the common planning time. Like, those teachers have to be collaborating, they have to be working together. And I was fortunate enough to be at a school when I was a middle school teacher where we did that really well. And here, our resource teachers and our self-contained teachers do that really well too. So those are big pieces of it, that if you have that collaboration and planning piece together, then you're going to get a lot out of it. So those were my big takeaways. And I think I had something here just with my information, and then time for any questions if anybody had any.
And feel free to, and if you'll stop sharing your screen,
Hmm.
feel free to unmute if you have any questions. But um, Graham, thanks for sharing how you've done it. I think one of the things that's really important is that um, we know that scheduling is something you have to look at every year based on the kids you need. And so I think a lot of us get stuck in, this is the way we've done it. And the needs of the kids may drive, even next year that you have to do something a little bit differently. And being creative and doing that, I think, is important. I don't know if you've seen that, even in the years when you were teaching.
Right. Like I know that for next year we're going to have to adjust because our fourth and fifth grade groups are very heavy. Like they have the majority of like if I just had one resource, like I could have one resource teacher just for those two grade levels. Like they're very heavy. There's 20 kids apiece in each of those grade levels with IEPs, very high. But our younger grades don't so much. So when that fifth grade group rolls out and it goes up, we're going to have to adjust anyways next year because of that. And then, of course, what we get coming to us and what's coming up from like our pre-K programs, we have a few pre-K disability classes where we're going to be looking at some kids as well. So always have to adjust.
And Graham, I appreciate you sharing that. It's so good to be able to go back and look at the way you've done it, but also that it's just really a mindset shift because we all sometimes we just get stuck in a rut, like Susan said. And when you start to schedule, you just kind of use the same schedule that you had last year and just kind of like try to pick teachers' names in there. I just remember when I was a principal, we had made the schedule very much like you did. And like we were in the first 9 weeks, and I never forget a teacher walked up to me and she said, well, now for next year, we need to remember to do such and such. And I said, well, hold on, we still have 9 weeks to go. Why are we waiting until next year? If it's something that we want to do, let's fix it now. And so we just got in the habit of knowing that as we went through the school year, that our schedules were fluid and that we had to do the best we could to make sure that we were meeting the needs of students. And that a lot of times we build schedules, and I hate to say this, but sometimes we build schedules that are very convenient for teachers sometimes. But we have to make sure that these children are the ones who we're serving. And we all know that, but how we do that with the time that we have is so, so incredibly valuable. So what you've done, I really appreciate you sharing that. So.
I like what you said about the walk to read, because I think in small schools where you might be it. I experienced that where I was the special ed teacher with grades K to 5. And we had kids that really needed what, some people are calling core replacement. And I think they're ending up getting dumped into self-contained because we don't have the manpower. So I think schools have to, I love when we think about whole school scheduling, because guess what? There are other kids that need that core replacement. We're not watering down, but we're working on those. I love you said, I think, Graham, essential. And we're really giving those more opportunities to respond with smaller class size. So I like that. And I think we have to think about that too, especially for our small schools, because you're one person and you may be carrying a full caseload. And so that makes it really difficult. So things to think about. There's no one way. All right, we've got a question in the chat, and then I thought I saw somebody that was going to ask a question too. The question in the chat is, based on the snapshot of your schedule, are you doing 40 minutes for ELA and math resource?
It's somewhere around, I think it's 40 minutes for some and 50 minutes for others. I'd have to go back and look, but it was based on like what the time frame was. Most of them are 40 minutes or more, right? Like I don't think we have anything less than that. So it should be around that, yes.
And that brings in a really great point. If you're using a program, and we know for kids who have intensive needs, I mean, the recommendation from the research is that we have curriculum, we use interventions that are curriculum based. We need to look at the time on those when we're putting times on IEPs, because I all too often see somebody get an evidence-based, great curriculum we know has good outcomes, but then they don't have time to do it in the schedule. So the fidelity is gone right there. And I will tell you that will help you to get the right minutes on the IEP if we're starting to think like that. How long is what we're doing going to take for what this kid needs? Um, and I think that's really important. And I think that's hard to do, and it takes time and a lot of flexibility. And you might sometimes have to change the IP a little bit, but it's so much easier now because we can amend them. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I've been doing this a fair amount of time over the years, and I landed at a wonderful little school, and they do something that I didn't think of when I was a school administrator and working on scheduling. And it doesn't really necessarily have to do with our students with special needs, but they do something called a roller coaster schedule. And so, like, we have, of course, like departments. So, like, if we have 2 homerooms, like one day the blue homeroom is going to start with the ELA teacher, and the red homeroom is starting with the math teacher. And then the next day we flip so that the children are not always like you're always getting the ELA instruction in the afternoon, or you're always getting the math instruction in the afternoon. So, and I feel like I've really noticed quite a difference in the kids. And it's been great to have, like, if we had a really rough afternoon class, then tomorrow morning we're going to get them fresh in the morning, and we get to kind of pick up where we left off. And you can kind of see that whatever seed I just planted, like, oh, even though I thought the lesson went terribly, then you can actually see it, like them kind of start clicking the next day. It's just something to think about. We have so many kids who are, at our school, it's a high poverty school. And some kids are really tired in the morning, so you're not getting their best. And then instead of doing that every single day, you get to have some rotation.
And April, that also helps with the students who come in late or sign out early all the time, because you're making sure that at some point they're getting the instruction in one or the other subjects that they're typically missing because they're either coming in late or signing out early.
Right. So just something that was new to me here. And I know with the older students in particular, that has been pretty impactful.
And I think that adds to that we have to be creative and flexible. And, we could all, we've got a lot of people on today, and you all have different experiences, and your school context is different. So I think Graham said a lot of things that are important, that working as a team to figure out what works for you. I think a lot of times we want to go and say, okay, school B over here is doing this, so let's do this, which might not work, with your school. I think it's really important that you look at your context and your teachers. One other important thing that I thought Graham said was looking at the skill set of your teachers and who likes to do what. I know as a resource teacher, I loved to teach reading. That was my jam. I loved it. I loved young children. I loved teaching beginning reading, that foundations of reading. The other 2 special ed teachers did not like doing that. And so we kind of went to our strength. That was always our discussion of, we went where people really had those things. And those are conversations we need to have with teachers. You really don't want me teaching your 6th grader. I mean, I can do it, but, might not want me doing math. That's not my strength. That's not my biggest strength. And so those are the discussions you want to have too.
Yeah, we definitely have some people, and maybe you guys have seen this too. I think the behavior for kids right now is, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. I don't know. It seems like it's more. And I think when they struggle and they have behavior, the general consensus is like, well, we need to throw them in self-contained. And that's not always the case. And I'm a big proponent of trying a lot of different things and a lot of different interventions to make sure that we figure out the why, and then we're able to support them in that. And then you match them with the person that we think can help. Like, again, I'll tell you, both of my resource teachers are great, but one of them does have a skill set with certain kids, and one has a skill set with another group of kids, and like they talk to each other, and like if you'll do this, and they work it out between them. I don't. It's not even a thing that I've told them. It's something that they do, and they're really good with it, and that ends up helping because we do have kids who have behavior goals, and they have things that they need to work on, and they're good with that piece, and that brings in the self-contained teachers as well, that they can help with those pieces of it too. So just using everybody as a big team, and I'm just fortunate that they all work well together because I know that that's not true in all places, but because they do, then they see it as like this is all of us, not just those are yours and mine. So that's really good.
We have a question. I'm interested to know what type of training is given to the parapros and how often do they get training? Do they participate in team meetings to collaborate and plan?
So the I'll say like from a district level training, I don't know of anything that they get besides I think we switched over to Mindset this year. Has anybody heard of Mindset? It's like the new CPI. Anyway, they all get that. But when we're talking to them and when we're working, especially those in our self-contained classes, it's like we need you working with kids in the group. Now the teacher plans it and they give it to them, right? So that they can make sure that they know what to do. So the teacher is telling them this is what you need to do, or maybe they're one collecting data, or they're running them through a short 15-minute part of like a U-Fly lesson that's scripted that they can run through. But it's usually stuff that's simple that the teacher is giving to them so that they can do it. But nothing from like a training standpoint. I wish that we had more time for that.
And I think that's some of the on the job training, but you've got to make, I mean, there's some things that need to be done overall, and then some things are so program specific for the parapros. But I think I do think it's important for districts to set up training for professionals. I know that's a problem everywhere because of their days they work and all that. I mean, I've seen all of that. I'm sure y'all have too. Um, we didn't talk a lot about high schools, but I do want to say that when you're thinking about high schools, um, that a lot of times what we found with our high schools was we did elective courses for those students that needed those targeted. We just called them those targeted essential skills. Like we had high school students that were still learning how to read, right? And so we did some things with that were elective courses and where we were working on those things, maybe trying to get kids ready for Algebra 1 or maybe some writing classes. And that actually worked really well because they were actually gen ed and special ed. And they were not we were very careful not to fill those classes with special ed kids with just, three, gen ed kids. And we ran multiple things, but that helped for those kids to get those skills without that teacher being overburdened. And then we had those strategy level classes where we were teaching kids those cognitive strategies or front loading information for them. And so I think when you're thinking about scheduling at the high school, I will say this, when your high school doesn't have skinnies, it makes it really hard. And so the more we can kind of work on getting some, even in small high schools, you could do some internal things to work on having skinnies within your schedules. But that's a big piece for those of you that are working in high schools.